I never thought the line between comfort and chaos could shatter so quickly, until that afternoon. Alone in the house with my stepmom, everything felt normal, until it didn't. Her lingering touch, the way her eyes held mine, and the unspoken tension filled the air. My heart raced as guilt battled desire. And then it happened, a moment I couldn't take back, one that would change everything forever. My name is Ethan, and I'm 22 years old. I've always considered my life pretty ordinary: quiet suburban streets, a steady job in tech, and the occasional night out with friends. But lately, things had started to feel different, emptier somehow, like I was drifting through life without direction. My dad, Mark, has always been a hardworking man, more focused on deadlines and business meetings than family dinners. It wasn't that he didn't care, he just had his priorities. And then there was Emma, my stepmom. She came into our lives when I was 10, and while I wasn't thrilled about it at first, she quickly proved herself. Emma wasn't like the stepmothers you see in movies. She was kind, patient, and effortlessly beautiful. She knew how to make people feel at ease, and over the years, she became more than just my dad's wife. She was family. Lately, though, something felt different about her. She seemed distant, more thoughtful, and maybe it was just my imagination, but the way she looked at me lingered longer than usual. That day started like any other. My dad left early for work, leaving Emma and me alone in the house. I was stretched out on the couch, scrolling through my phone, while she moved around the kitchen preparing lunch. The house felt peaceful, the kind of quiet I usually found comforting. But then Emma stepped into the living room, and suddenly, everything felt different. She smiled at me, but there was something in her eyes, a softness that made my chest tighten. "Hey, Ethan. How's your day going?" Her voice was light, but I couldn't help noticing how close she was standing. Emma had always carried herself with a quiet elegance, but today, I saw her differently. The way her shirt hugged her figure, the way her hair fell loosely around her shoulders. It stirred something in me I couldn't explain. I told myself it was nothing, just a passing thought. But when she sat down next to me and rested her hand on my arm, my pulse quickened. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" Her words were comforting, but her touch lingered, and that was the moment everything started to change. The air felt heavier after that moment, like something invisible had shifted between us. I told myself I was imagining things, that Emma's touch was nothing more than a caring gesture. But as she sat beside me, her fingers still resting lightly on my arm, I couldn't ignore the way my heart raced. "You've seemed distracted lately," Emma said softly, her eyes searching mine. "Is everything okay?" I swallowed hard, trying to focus. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just work stuff, I guess." But Emma didn't look convinced. "You don't have to pretend with me, Ethan. I can tell when something's bothering you." Her voice was soothing, but it only made my nerves worse. She shifted closer, her knee brushing against mine. It was such a small touch, yet it sent a wave of heat through me. I hated myself for noticing, for the way my body reacted. This was Emma, my stepmom. I couldn't think about her like that. But then she smiled, a soft, knowing smile that made it impossible to look away. "You know," she said, her voice quieter now, "I used to feel the same way. Like I was stuck. Like no one really noticed me." Her words hit deeper than I expected. I'd always seen Emma as confident and put together, but hearing her admit to feeling invisible made her seem more human. And that scared me. "I notice you," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes softened, and for a moment neither of us spoke. I felt the tension build, like we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't name. Then Emma's hand moved slowly, almost hesitantly, trailing down to my wrist. "I know you do," she whispered. My pulse pounded in my ears. I should have pulled away. I should have said something to break the moment. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed frozen, my thoughts spiraling as Emma leaned in slightly, her breath warm against my skin. "Emma," I finally managed, my voice trembling. She blinked, as if snapping out of a trance, and quickly pulled her hand back. "Sorry," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." But I wasn't uncomfortable. That was the problem. I tried to act normal after that, tried to push the moment out of my head. But Emma's touch lingered, haunting me even after she left the room. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Emma started showing up in my thoughts at the most random moments, when I was working, when I was lying in bed, even when I was talking to friends. And it wasn't just me. Emma seemed different too. She laughed more, touched my arm casually, and found reasons to be near me. One evening, as I sat in the living room, Emma came in wearing a dress I'd never seen before. It hugged her curves in a way that made my throat go dry. "What do you think?" she asked, twirling slightly. I stammered, struggling to find words. You look nice. She smiled, but there was something behind it, something daring. You really think so? She asked, stepping closer. I nodded, my mouth suddenly too dry to speak. You're sweet, Ethan, she said, her voice softer now. You always notice the little things. Her words hung in the air, heavy and charged. And as much as I tried to convince myself that it was innocent, I couldn't ignore the pull I felt. The way her eyes held mine, daring me to say something, to do something. I knew this was dangerous. I knew I was playing with fire. But I couldn't seem to stop myself from stepping closer to the edge. The days after that first touch were unbearable. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment, but the tension between Emma and me only grew stronger. Every time we passed each other in the house, her eyes lingered just a second too long. When she brushed past me in the kitchen, her touch felt deliberate, lingering just enough to send shivers down my spine. I told myself to stop thinking about it, but I couldn't. The turning point came one evening when Dad left on another business trip. He kissed Emma goodbye at the door, his usual distracted self, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside the house he was leaving behind. It's just us tonight, Emma said, her voice softer than usual as the door closed behind him. I nodded, forcing a smile as I tried to ignore the pounding in my chest. Later that evening, I was on the couch, scrolling through my phone when Emma walked into the living room. She had changed into something more casual, shorts and a loose tank top, and my eyes betrayed me, flickering to the curve of her legs before I quickly looked away. Mind if I join you? She asked. Of course, I replied, my voice unsteady. She sat down beside me, closer than usual, her thigh brushing against mine. I tried to focus on the TV, but her presence was overwhelming. You've been quiet lately, she said, her voice low. Is everything okay? I turned to face her, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't noticed before, uncertainty mixed with desire. I don't know, I admitted. I just feel lost. Her hand rested gently on my knee, her touch sending a jolt through me. You're not lost, Ethan, she said softly. You're just figuring things out. And that's okay. Her words felt like more than comfort. They felt like permission to let go of the guilt, the doubt, and the fear. Before I could stop myself, I reached for her hand. Emma, this feels... I started, but she didn't let me finish. Don't overthink it, she whispered, leaning in. Her lips brushed against mine, soft and hesitant, but the moment I kissed her back, everything changed. The kiss deepened, and my hands found her waist, pulling her closer. She let out a soft sigh, and the sound only fueled the fire that had been building between us. We can't do this, I murmured, even as my hands trailed down her back. But we are, she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. Her lips found mine again, and this time, there was no hesitation. Her fingers tangled in my hair, and my heart pounded as the rest of the world faded away. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathless. What are we doing? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emma's eyes were filled with longing, but also fear. I don't know, she admitted. But I don't want to stop. Her words sent another wave of heat through me, but the guilt came crashing down just as quickly. This is wrong, I said, pulling away slightly. Then why does it feel so right? She countered, her hand tightening around mine. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the line we had crossed couldn't be uncrossed. Over the next few days, the tension between us only grew stronger. Emma started finding excuses to be near me, offering me coffee in the mornings, brushing past me in the hallway, and sitting closer whenever we watched TV. I knew it was dangerous. I knew it couldn't last. But every time she touched me, looked at me, or whispered my name, my resolve crumbled. One afternoon, she cornered me in the laundry room. We need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. About what? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. About this. She stepped closer, her fingers grazing my arm. I can't stop thinking about you, Ethan, she confessed. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, because I felt the exact same way. Emma, tell me you don't feel it too, she pleaded, her eyes searching mine. I couldn't. Instead, I closed the distance between us, my lips crashing against hers as weeks of tension finally exploded. This time there was no hesitation. No second-guessing. Her hands tugged at my shirt, and I pulled her closer, desperate to feel every inch of her against me. The world outside ceased to exist as we lost ourselves in each other, giving in to the temptation we'd been fighting for so long. When it was over, we lay in silence, the weight of what we'd done sinking in. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely audible. Emma didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for my hand, intertwining her fingers with mine. I don't know, she said softly. But I don't want this to end. Her words terrified me, but they also thrilled me. Because deep down, I didn't want it to end either. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet. I avoided Emma, but her presence lingered everywhere. On the couch where we'd sat, in the kitchen where we'd shared dinner, and most of all, in my mind. No matter how much I tried to focus on other things, I couldn't shake the memory of her touch, her voice, her lips. I told myself it was over. It had to be. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Later that afternoon, I was in my room pretending to work when there was a knock at the door. Ethan. Emma's voice was soft, hesitant. I didn't answer at first, but then the door creaked open, and she stepped inside. She looked nervous, like she was just as unsure about what had happened as I was. Can we talk? She asked, closing the door behind her. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I could handle the conversation. She sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands. About last night, she started, trailing off as if searching for the right words. It shouldn't have happened, I cut in quickly, trying to take control of the situation. We both know that. Emma flinched slightly, but then she shook her head. Do we? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I can't stop thinking about it, Ethan. About you. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to deny it, to tell her it didn't mean anything. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about it either. Emma, this isn't fair, to Dad, to us. I know, she said, cutting me off. But I can't pretend it didn't happen. And I don't think you can either. I stared at her, my heart pounding. What are you saying? I don't know, she admitted. I just know that I haven't felt this alive in years. And I think you feel it too. Before I could respond, we heard the sound of the front door opening. My dad's voice carried through the house. Emma? Ethan? I'm home. Panic shot through me. Emma jumped to her feet, smoothing her clothes and running a hand through her hair. We'll talk later, she whispered before slipping out of the room. Dinner that night was unbearable. My dad sat at the head of the table, talking about work, oblivious to the tension between Emma and me. She avoided my gaze, focusing on her plate, but every so often, our eyes would meet, and the electricity from the night before came rushing back. I tried to play it cool, but my dad noticed something was off. You okay, Ethan? You're quiet tonight. Just tired, I mumbled, pushing food around on my plate. Emma shifted uncomfortably, and for a moment, I thought my dad might pick up on the tension. But he just nodded and went back to talking about a new project at work. Later that night, I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emma. Can we meet? I need to see you. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I knew I should ignore it, but I couldn't. Where? I replied. The guest room. In 10 minutes. My pulse raced as I stared at the screen. I told myself I'd go just to talk, to set boundaries and make sure this didn't go any further. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. When I slipped into the guest room, Emma was already there, pacing nervously. She stopped when she saw me, her eyes filled with a mix of longing and guilt. I'm sorry, she said before I could speak. I didn't mean to drag you into this, but I can't pretend it didn't happen. I swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. Emma, this can't keep happening. We'll get caught. I know, she whispered, stepping closer. But what if we don't? Her words sent a shiver down my spine. What do you mean? I mean, what if we stop worrying about what people will think? About your dad? I froze, the weight of her words sinking in. You can't be serious. I don't know what I'm saying, she admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. I just know that I don't feel this way with him anymore. And I don't want to lose how I feel when I'm with you. Her confession hit me harder than I expected. I stepped closer, wiping away a tear that slid down her cheek. Emma. But before I could finish, she leaned in and kissed me again. This time, it wasn't soft or hesitant. It was desperate, filled with all the emotions we'd been trying to suppress. We didn't hear the door creak open. What the hell is this? My dad's voice cut through the room like a knife, freezing us in place. Emma stepped back, her face pale, and my heart dropped into my stomach. Dad! Don't, he roared, his face red with rage. I trusted you, Emma. And you. He pointed at me, his voice shaking. You're my son. I tried to explain, to make him understand, but the damage was done. He stormed out of the room, leaving Emma and me standing there, stunned. What have we done? Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Emma sank onto the bed, her hands trembling as she buried her face in them. I stood frozen, my mind reeling from what had just happened. My dad's face flashed in my head, his rage, his disbelief. I had never seen him look at me like that, like I was a stranger. A traitor. What do we do now? Emma's voice broke the silence, but I had no answers. I don't know, I said, my voice hoarse. But I need to talk to him. Emma's eyes snapped up to meet mine, filled with panic. No, Ethan. You can't. Not yet. He's too angry. And you think ignoring this is going to make it better? She didn't answer. She just stared at me, her eyes red and swollen. I walked out of the room, half expecting my dad to be waiting in the hallway, ready to throw me out. But the house was eerily quiet. His keys were gone. He had left. The next day felt like walking through a fog. My dad wasn't answering my calls, and Emma barely came out of her room. The guilt was suffocating. Every time I thought about his face, the way his voice cracked when he yelled, I felt sick. But the worst part was the doubt. Was it really just a mistake? Or had we crossed a line we could never come back from? Later that evening, Emma finally came downstairs. Her hair was pulled back, and she was wearing the same jeans and t-shirt she'd worn the day before. She looked tired, broken even, but there was something else in her eyes too. We need to talk, she said, her voice steady but quiet. I nodded, bracing myself for whatever was coming. I think we need to stop this. The words stung, but I knew she was right. I don't want to hurt you, Ethan. And I don't want to hurt him. But this, it can't go on. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. What about last night? What about everything you said? I meant it, she admitted, tears forming in her eyes. But sometimes what we want isn't what's right. Her words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. So what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We try to move on. We fix this, if it can even be fixed. Days turned into weeks, but the house never felt the same. My dad eventually came home, but he didn't talk to either of us. He barely looked at me. Emma and I avoided each other as much as possible. She stopped lingering in the kitchen or sitting close to me on the couch. Instead, she acted like nothing had happened, even though we both knew it had. One night, I found my dad sitting in the living room, staring at the TV. Dad, can we talk? He didn't look at me. What's there to talk about? I'm sorry, I said, my voice shaking. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. You didn't mean for it to happen, he repeated. Do you have any idea what you've done, Ethan? To me? To this family? It wasn't planned, I said quickly. It just happened. No, he snapped. Things like this don't just happen. You made a choice. Both of you. I felt my chest tighten. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did. He stood up, pacing the room. And now I have to figure out what to do next. Dad, please. Don't. He held up his hand, his voice breaking. You don't get to ask me for anything right now. He left the room, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of his words. In the weeks that followed, the distance between all of us grew. My dad moved into the guest room, and Emma barely spoke to him. She told me later that she didn't know if their marriage could survive this, but she was going to try, for his sake. And for mine, I tried to move on too. I threw myself into work, avoided being home as much as possible, and cut off all contact with Emma. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget what had happened. One afternoon, Emma caught me as I was leaving the house. Ethan, wait. I turned to face her, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the same softness in her eyes that had pulled me in before. I need you to know something, she said. I don't regret what happened, but I do regret hurting him. And I think we both need to let this go, for his sake, and for ours. I nodded, even though part of me didn't want to let it go. Goodbye, Emma. I walked out the door knowing it was the right thing to do, but also knowing that some mistakes leave scars you can't erase. The days after I walked out that door felt empty. I thought leaving Emma behind would bring relief, that cutting ties would somehow erase the memories, but it didn't. Her voice, her touch, and the look in her eyes still haunted me. At home, my dad and Emma's relationship remained strained. He barely spoke to either of us, and the tension in the house felt suffocating. I caught glimpses of Emma moving through the halls like a shadow of her former self, tired, distant, and guilty. I couldn't blame her. I felt the same way. One evening, I sat across from my dad at the dinner table. It was the first time we'd been alone since the confrontation. I knew I had to speak, even if I wasn't sure it would make a difference. Dad, I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I can't undo what happened, but I need you to know how much I regret it. He didn't look at me at first. When he finally did, his eyes were tired, more tired than I'd ever seen them. "Regret doesn't change what you did, Ethan," he said quietly. "It doesn't fix this family." His words hit hard, but I didn't argue. I knew he was right. "I know," I whispered. I hope one day you can forgive me." He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and walked away, leaving me alone at the table. Time passed, but the damage lingered. Emma eventually moved out, and Dad filed for divorce. Watching their marriage fall apart because of what we'd done made me hate myself more than I already did. But what haunted me most wasn't the guilt, it was the doubt. Did Emma and I feel something real, or was it just a moment of weakness that spiraled out of control? I tried to push the questions away, but they lingered, refusing to let me go. Months later, I saw Emma again. I ran into her at a coffee shop. She looked different, older somehow, like the weight of what had happened had left a permanent mark. She smiled softly when she saw me, but it wasn't the same smile that used to light up the room. "Hi," she said, her voice careful. "Hi." For a moment, we just stood there, unsure of what to say. Then Emma spoke. "How's your dad?" "Not great," I admitted. "But he's trying." She nodded, her eyes flickering with sadness. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said softly. "For everything." I wanted to tell her I was sorry too, that I still thought about her, still missed her. But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded. "Me too." And then she was gone. Looking back, I realized that what happened with Emma wasn't just about temptation. It was about loneliness, insecurity, and the search for something that felt alive in a life that had grown too predictable. I learned the hard way that some lines can't be uncrossed, no matter how much you wish you could go back. Emma and I weren't just guilty of betraying my dad, we betrayed ourselves. We let our emotions overpower our judgment, and the fallout hurt everyone involved. But as painful as it was, it also forced me to grow. I learned to face the consequences of my actions instead of running from them. I learned that love, real love, isn't about moments of passion. It's about trust, respect, and commitment. And I vowed never to make the same mistake again. Final thought. Some mistakes leave scars, but scars are reminders. They remind us of who we were, what we lost, and what we never want to lose again. What would you do if forbidden desires threatened to destroy the people you loved? Could you walk away, or would you give in and risk it all? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take on this story. If this story left you questioning love, loyalty, and boundaries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more shocking tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat.